A couple of years ago, at the time that I'm making this film, a couple of years ago, for the first time ever, a woman of Indian ethnicity won the Miss America crown. Not normally something to which I would pay any attention, but she was of Indian ethnicity. She did, for her talent entry, Bollywood fusion dance to a song from a popular Bollywood movie, and she won. I kind of thought I was ahead of the curve on that one, but I guess Twitter was inundated by people screaming, "Look at that! We have a damned Muslim. She should be crowned Miss Al Qaeda or whatever," and so forth and so forth and so forth. Now, I can't begin to disabuse the American public of all the misconceptions they have, which is essentially that everything east of, say, Tunisia is painted with one brush. She was of Indian ethnicity, although she's a native-born American, and she also is a Hindu. I'm not going to talk about the misconceptions people have when they can't keep straight who is a Hindu, who is a Sikh, who is a Muslim, who is a Buddhist. I'm going to talk about particularly some very common misconceptions that Hindu spokespeople like to address when they're talking to Westerners concerning what Westerners think about the Hindu tradition, but in fact those are misconceptions, okay? Cows. Hindus do not worship cows. The cow is a very important symbol in many of the Vedas and the Upanishads, because the cow is a symbol of motherly love. I've had people, scoff at that because they grew up on a dairy farm or whatever. Remember, a cow on a dairy farm is being treated as a commodity. This is not the way a cow would work if it was, say, free range. People who work with cows on sanctuaries or free range farms or whatever say, yeah, the cows have a very, very strong maternal instinct. Also, cows give milk, their dung becomes fuel, their urine, believe it or not, is a very strong disinfectant. There are all kinds of things that the cows provide, and the cow is therefore a symbol. So cows are revered as a symbol of motherly love and of the goddess. For that reason, you may be subject to a criminal prosecution if you harm a cow in certain parts of India. Not in all parts of India, but in certain parts of India. Okay? But that does not mean that cows are worshipped as such. Okay? And indeed, the attitudes toward how you should properly treat cows will vary a great deal throughout India. Cows are important because mothers are very important in Indian culture. The goddess is very much revered. In Western religions, you usually hear about God the Father. It's just as common, if not more common, in India to think of God as Mother, as the Great Mother. Okay, if you go back all the way to early times when the goddess traditions in the West still prevailed, the Gaia traditions and so forth, you have the same sorts of attitudes. We are all born of the earth is our mother. Your mother is, like the divine giving birth to you. You come out of her body, and she cares for you and so forth. There was a film called Monsoon Wedding in which two Indian women tell each other a joke, and it's actually a joke I've heard from Indians before. One says to the other, "Did you know that Jesus was from India?" The other one says, "What do you mean?" "Of course, he's a typically Indian male. He lived at home until he was 30. He went into his father's line of work. He thought his mother was a virgin, and she thought he was God." And then they both dissolve in laughter. Well, that's a joke, and I feel comfortable telling that joke because I've heard so many Indians tell that joke. And yeah, it's very, very, very common to have a strong relationship with your mother. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. We have modular families in our culture. You get up, you move away, maybe call your parents on the holidays or something, see them once in a while, and that family bond is just not as strong. So, okay, take the cow in context as a symbol of things that actually we might do very well to revere ourselves a little more than we do. Karma. Many people I talked about this a little in a previous lecture. Many people see karma as a kind of fatalism. It doesn't matter what I do, my karma is going to catch up with me, and so forth and so forth and so forth. Karma determines the circumstance that you encounter, the things that you encounter. It doesn't fate you as regards what you do about what happens to you. You have the freedom to choose how you're going to respond to what happens to you. Okay, two people born into the same circumstances may, through different choices, either flourish or despair. Okay, so karma. The belief in karma is not a belief in some sort of fatalism that says I have no choice about my life. Quite the opposite. You are right now manufacturing your future choices because you are choosing what you will become. Okay, caste. Okay, there's the big one. Okay. One Hindu spokesperson, a Hindu priest who specializes in talking to Westerners, says, I like to call these the 3 Ks: cows, karma, and caste. And of course he's being facetious because it's all a k sound, which in Sanskrit would have to be the same letter. It's going to make the same sound, but English is a mongrel language, like made up of many, many, many different languages blended together. So, okay, caste. There's not a great deal of agreement, insofar as I can tell, at least in this point in history, as to exactly how the caste system became what it is. Different castes are talked about in ancient scriptures, but they are clearly different roles in life, and each is seen as, if you will, interdependent with the others. Okay? There's the Brahmin class. These are the priests. They learn Sanskrit. They keep the rituals and the temples and the scriptures and the practices alive, so they have a very important role to play. Kshatri class, these are the kings, the princes, the generals, the people who have administrative responsibility for keeping the land viable. Vaishya, these are merchants or landowners, people who are, if you will, in business. They're keeping the food and the products and so forth available, but they are the people who own the means of production. The Shudras, I just erased the A there, sorry. The Shudras are workers. If I'm a Vaishya, I own the farm. If I'm a Shudra, I may work on the farm. Okay? If I'm a Vaishya, I may have a workshop or factory or something. If I'm a Shudra, I may be working in that factory. Okay? Below the system, if you will, are the Dalits or Harijan. These are the outcasts, and that, of course, is what everyone in the West thinks about immediately when they hear the word caste. The people who are considered to be below, they're polluted. They do jobs that encounter ritual pollution, such as working with dead bodies, butchering animals, cleaning out public latrines, that kind of thing. And they're shunned. They do not have equal rights. De facto, they do not. I mean, legally they do, but you know how that can go. On paper, you have equal rights. In life, if you try to actually exercise equal rights, you'll probably end up dead. This has always been a huge problem for modern India. Now, there are historians who say that actually, while there were castes, there was not this tremendously rigid division between castes prior to British colonialism, that the British exacerbated those class differences as a way of dividing and maintaining control over Indians. Okay? I'm not an historian, and I really do not have any means of adjudicating whether that's a legitimate claim or not. I would simply say that, based on my own knowledge of history, it's a very typical kind of thing for a colonial power to do. Divide people along whatever lines you can find, because if they're fighting with each other, it's easier to control them. When India became independent in 1948, when the Brits got out, guess what? The Constitution, the new Indian Constitution, made caste illegal, which had pretty much zero effect on anything. An Indian friend of mine recently complained, it's unconstitutional to observe class distinctions, but if you fill out an application to a government agency for a job, you have to indicate your caste. If you go to an online wedding site, looking for a bride, looking for a groom site, for Indian potential brides and grooms, what you'll find is that everyone mentions what caste he or she belongs to. And they're not just these basic ones, there are all kinds of micro divisions in between the castes. I'm a Brahmin, well, I'm a higher Brahmin. Okay, well, I'm only a Shudra, but I'm a higher Shudra than you are. Yeah, you can imagine that is a very quarrelsome way to live. Mahatma Gandhi renamed the outcasts, if you will, the untouchables, renamed them Harijan, which means literally children of God. So because he wanted to reverse the way they were thought about. Most Dalits today regard the Harijan name as being degrading, as being condescending. They don't like it. It is a continuing issue for modern India. Many Hindus, historically, and many modern Hindus don't think caste amounts to a hill of beans. Okay, you do not have to observe caste in order to be a Hindu. So do we have a caste system in our society? How about, racial, gender, economic equality? Do we have different social classes that are rigidly defined and don't want to have a whole lot to do with each other? Yeah, of course we do. I mean, this is simply labeling the problem in a particular culture. It's an Indian problem. It's not especially a Hindu problem. Okay? Many, as I say, many modern Hindus just would completely disavow the whole notion of caste. Sexism. Again, this is a social problem. This is not a problem with Hinduism. Hinduism reveres the goddess and holds the goddess to be one of the most auspicious ways of regarding the divine. Okay, there are, of course, infinitely many ways to approach the divine, but approaching the divine in the form of a goddess, whether it's Kali Ma or Lakshmi, the goddess associated with wealth and good fortune, because the mother is so revered, and because you look to God for comfort and nurture and so forth, and your life comes from the divine, the mother and the goddess is revered. And the irony is that very often people who revere the goddess nevertheless don't treat their own wives very well or don't treat their own daughters very well. Again, that is a social problem. That is not something that is a defining characteristic of Hinduism. You don't have to be sexist to be Hindu. There are many modern Hindu women who have achieved a great deal of success in the business world, in the entertainment world, and in the political world. Okay, sexism is sexism. It's not particularly tied to any one religion. There are those who would look to their religion as a way of disavowing sexism, and there are those who would look to their religion as a way of enforcing and insisting on sexism. But that also occurs in Western religions, doesn't it? Poverty. Hinduism does not lead to poverty. Okay? I don't know why it is that anyone would assume that, but indeed a lot of the missionary literature that you'll see from Western missionaries talking about India or working in India will say, look at how poor they are, look at how they struggle. Clearly they need a better religion. Hello? Yeah, and if she weighs as much as a duck, that means she floats on the water, which means she's a witch, and so we burn her. What? No, poverty, again, is a social problem. It has nothing to do with being a Hindu. There are prosperous Hindus. There are Hindus who are not prosperous. And a large part of that is essentially what happened to India under colonialism, where they lost the village crafts, the traditional ways of supporting themselves, of managing their relationship with the environment. If you want to know more about that, take my environmental ethics class. But let's just say this is not some consequence of being a Hindu. Violence. Well, guess what? Whenever you combine nationalism with religion, you're going to get intolerance and violence. We see that in our own country. We see that in our international relations. And within Indian society, there are extremists. Okay? Those extremists see themselves as protecting India from the influence of anything that is not Indian, so they see themselves, if you will, as being super Hindu because they associate being Hindu with being Indian. Not tolerance with being a Hindu, but rather no Christians, no Muslims, no Buddhists, no whatever. Those people, they're not real Indians. We're real Indians. Well, we see that in our own country. You're not a real American because you're not a Christian like me. Well, okay, you're a Christian, but you're not the right kind of Christian. Yeah, you see this all the time, and there has been a lot of violence in India perpetrated by Hindu extremists. Most of the great sages of Hinduism, I think, would be very quick to say that that is a total misunderstanding of their spiritual heritage, to say it goes out, you should use it to separate yourself from your brothers and sisters and go out and do violence to them. That's just not something that is demanded by Hinduism at all. Charlatans. Okay, many Westerners believe that the yogis and the wise men and the sages and so forth are all just con artists. Okay? And there's a good reason for that. A large number of them are. Again, that's not a particular problem with Hinduism. That's a particular problem with religion and popular culture. You have a lot of people who realize they can make good money by being a religious leader, and essentially their faith isn't especially deep, but they are very persuasive and charismatic. The late comic Sam Kinison was the son of a televangelist and began as a televangelist, and then he said, I realized that I could make way more money as a stand-up comic than as a televangelist, and I wouldn't have to do anything especially different to be a stand-up comic from what I was doing as a televangelist. Okay, well, that is the unfortunate perception that sometimes people have of religion in general. That's not true of religion in general. That's true of frauds and charlatans within religion. And certainly Hinduism is not the only religion to have frauds and charlatans who want to exploit people. Okay? So when you see a fake guru or someone claiming to have extravagant magical powers because of their spirituality or whatever, and they're within the Hindu tradition, just remember that's all over the place. That has nothing particular to do with being a Hindu. And there are many very sincere and very accomplished sages and teachers within the Hindu tradition. That's what Hinduism is actually about. New Age. Okay? New Age is simply a catch-all term for a lot of things that have come up with the West that tend to be extremely vague, tend to sometimes claim to be scientific and to totally misunderstand the science that they're referencing. Basically, people who take a skeptical look at New Age cures and New Age practices and so forth often say if you really, you check the facts, you do the math, you hold it up to scrutiny, it's snake oil. Okay? Now, again, I don't want to say everyone who is called New Age is necessarily some kind of fraud or charlatan, but it has its share. Hinduism is not New Age thought. Okay? And many Westerners who maybe are already enamored of New Age thought may, when encountering Hinduism, begin misinterpreting it, reducing it to the stuff that they already know, that's already familiar to them. I like to say the New Age gambit, or strategy, if you will, is that you can take any two ideas, and if you express both vaguely enough, you can make them sound like they are each other. Right? How to pickle a cucumber, how to build a particle collider. Well, express both vaguely enough and it sounds like, yeah, it's the same set of skills, isn't it? You take something and you make it into something else and it's going to make transformations of the blah, 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 blah. Yeah, of course, you can, as long as you don't actually get down to details, you can make them sound like they're the same thing. There have been a lot of misrepresentations by perhaps well-meaning and sincere people of Hinduism in the West, and that's a hurdle really to understanding what Hinduism is actually about. Okay. Now again, I'm not saying that New Age teachers or yogis who make extraordinary claims or whatever, that any of these people are bad people or that they have nothing worthwhile to say. What I'm saying is that all of these particular categories lead to common misconceptions about Hinduism. Okay? So, if we want to ask, what is it that draws people to Hinduism, that has drawn millions of people to Hinduism? It's not simply being born in India, because you do have options, right? If you're born in India, you have plenty of options. What draws people to Hinduism, and has drawn millions of people to Hinduism, and is drawing more and more people in the West to Hinduism, is its spiritual core. And that's what we want to keep focused on.